Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Ohioana Book Festival. My name is Kari Gunter-Seymour, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the National Poetry Month celebration panel. We'd like to thank our festival sponsors and partners and all whom you can find listed in the Ohioana website. And thanks to our official bookseller, the Book Loft of German Village. You can get copies of all the books featured at the festival by going online to bookloft.com. And for everyone in the audience, we'll be leaving the last 10 minutes or so of this session for questions. If you'd like to ask our panelists a question, please enter it into the Zoom Q&A feature. Don't put it in the chat boxes. We may end up losing it along the way. I have four outstanding poets with me today: George Bilgere, Marianne Chan, Pauletta Hansel, and Wendy Mcvicker. So I Googled, what is the purpose of National Poetry Month? Because I guess I'd never done that before, and I thought I was doing things right, but just to make sure, I checked, and this is what it said. It's just a wonderfully simple statement. The goals of National Poetry Month are to highlight the extraordinary legacy and ongoing achievements of American poets, encourage the reading of poems, and assist teachers in bringing poetry into their classrooms. So let's get busy doing just that by meeting our poets. George Bilgere has published 6 collections of poetry, including Blood Pages and Imperial. He has won a multitude of awards and distinctions for his work, including the Midland Authors Award and a Pushcart Prize. Bilgere's poetry, while residing firmly in the everyday world of janitors, college students, or siblings, is noted for its controlled poignancy and lipid free verse line. He lives in Cleveland, where he teaches creative writing at John Carroll University, and today we'll be focused on his new book, Central Air. And with humor and compassion, Central Air continues George's explorations of the human predicament. The settings of those poems range from Cleveland to Berlin, from childhood to old age. Bilgere's subject, in the largest sense, is America in all its craziness, its haunted past, its imperiled future. But what really centers this book is the English language itself. I had the great pleasure of meeting and hearing George read recently, and I'm excited for all of you to hear him too. Welcome, George.
Thanks so much, Kari, and it's great to be here. And thanks for calling my verse limpid. And here's my collection of limpid verse called Central Air. I like that word. I'm not quite sure, limpid, but yeah. I think, like most poets, my work is more about the language itself than it is about any particular subject matter. I've spent my whole career doing experiments in voice, in trying to find a way of sounding. I guess the poems I like most of mine are poems that somehow manage to bring humor and seriousness into the same poem. And I thought, well, I'll just start off with a poem. And this one is called, I do most of my writing at a cafe. I love sitting, especially in the summer, I love sitting at outdoor cafes. And this is a poem that has me doing what I usually do in the mornings in the summer, sitting at a cafe writing. And the poem is kind of inspired by something odd that's been going on in the language for, I don't know, a decade or so. And that is when you ask a young person, let's say a waiter, to do something for you, like, could I have another cup of coffee? They often say, no problem, as if ordinarily it would be a problem. It's always seemed a bit strange to me. So that was the kicking off point for this poem, which is called No Problem. I sit here aging at the street-side cafe, giving off the sickly yellow smoke of decay, while people walk by pretending not to notice glancing away into the distance or down at their phones, doing their best out of politeness or shock to ignore me sitting here aging, and I don't blame them. It's hard to watch. And now the waitress in her burning beauty, her lustrous, incandescent womanhood, walks up to me in a radiant cloud of youth and asks if I want another iced latte macchiato. But I'm aging so fast, I'm racing so quickly through time, I can barely hear her. And furthermore, I know what she really wants to say is, your aging is kind of gross, kind of a turnoff. Maybe you could go do it somewhere else where it doesn't frighten the customers. And besides, it's not like there's anything I can do about it. And as I sit here with my skin peeling off and crumpling up like toilet paper, and my hair falling out on the table, and my teeth rotting, and my bones turning to glass, and all my organs drowning in the sludge of age, I croak to her as she floats in the cool, creamy oasis of her youthful lustrousness. I do manage to croak, yeah, another iced latte macchiato would be great. And from the far side of the universe, from the beautiful, bountiful, burning galaxy of her late teens, she says to the fast decaying, maybe starting to smell bad, just about to be covered with flies, old leathery carcass, I'm becoming no problem. Except that there is actually a problem. And that's one of my limpid poems.
Nice use of the word croak there, George. I liked that you got that in there.
I don't use that word often enough, I feel, croak. Before I croak, I'm going to use croak as often as possible.
I also like Sludge of Age. I feel like that could be a great poetry collection title.
That would be a poetry collection title, or maybe the name of a new ice cream drink.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'll have another Sludge of Age, please.
No problem.
Yeah.
No problem.
Oh my goodness. Wonderful, 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 George. Thank you so much. Oh.
Isn't it fun to watch the language changing? I mean, I actually had a French-speaking friend comment on this no problem and how it had infected, in his view, French. And people started saying, pas de problème, which is an exact translation of no problem. And he was just ranting on about how that was not French.
I wonder, to me, the worst infection that has happened in the English language, but this has been a while, is, what I call the like virus. Mm-hmm. I'm very fond of using like, and I wonder if that has made its way into other languages. I have done no research on this, but it's bad here.
I think Billy Collins has a poem about that, doesn't he? I
Yeah,
can't remember the title. Yeah.
He finishes it. Yes, he has a wonderful like poem, and he finishes it. He also talks about the fact that another phrase that has infected the language is, oh my God, oh my God. And his poem ends with a young woman saying, I'm like, oh my God, which my students say all the time.
And I think it's, the like is, I think that the like is a kind of unwillingness to commit.
Yeah.
To self, to knowledge, to affirm opinion on the subject. And it's similar in a way to how, and this happens more with young women and now middle-aged women, because it's been going on for a while, how the voice goes up at the end of a sentence.
You mean upspeak?
That is not a question.
I think there's actually a term for that, upspeak. Yeah, that's big too.
That tentativeness.
Mm-hmm. Like, we're going to go to the store. Some milk. But this is what poets.
Okay, you wily poets, I'm going to rein you in because we want to be able to hear everybody's poem today. So if you don't mind, I'm going to move you forward to
But
our
we were
next.
giving a writing prompt, Kari.
You were about to. You want to give a writing prompt?
No. Conversation, hopefully.
Yes, and hopefully people will come out with prompts from your discussions. Let's move on to Marianne Chan. Grew up in Stuttgart, Germany, and Lansing, Michigan. She is currently living in Cincinnati, Ohio, pursuing a PhD in English and creative writing at the University of Cincinnati. She is the winner of the 2021 Great Lakes Colleges Association New Writers Award, the 2021 Ohioana Book Award in Poetry, congratulations, and the 2022 Association for Asian American Studies Book Award for Outstanding Achievement. She is the author of All Heathens. All Heathens is a declaration of ownership, of bodies, of histories, of time. Revisiting Magellan's voyage around the world, Marianne Chan navigates her Filipino heritage by grappling with notions of diaspora, circumnavigation, and discovery. Chan paints wry, witty renderings of an anecdotal and folkloric history while both preserving and unveiling a self that dares any other to try and claim it. Welcome, Marianne.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kari. And I'm so honored and happy to be here with all of you. So I guess I'll just tell you a little bit about my book and then I'll go into a poem. So All Heathens, like Kari mentioned, is about my family and our immigration from the Philippines to the US by way of Europe. But it's also about Magellan's voyage and the early history of the Spanish colonization of the Philippines. So in this book, I wanted to explore that early history of colonization and think about the ways in which that history continues to impact Filipinos today, including myself and my family. So the first poem I'm going to read, or the poem I'm going to read right now, is called Love Song for Antonio Picafetta. And Antonio Pigafetta was Magellan's chronicler, and he was this young Italian man who wanted adventure, so he joined Magellan's voyage and he wrote about it. But he wrote about where my family is from, which is the island of Cebu, and he wrote about the violence that occurred there that he endorsed, but also the people there and their customs. And Antonio Pigafetta's family was from Vicenza, Italy. And coincidentally, my family used to travel regularly to Vicenza, Italy from Germany. And so because he wrote about where my family is from, I thought that it was only fair for me to write about where his family is from or was from. So this is Love Song for Antonio Pigafetta. And there's an epigraph. The longest and most valuable narrative of the voyage was written by a young Italian who is neither a professional seaman nor humanist. R.A. Skelton, Magellan's Voyage. I consider you a forefather, Tony, even though you were from Venice and your beard held the aroma of gondolas passing through a canal. Still, I tell people you were my great-great-grandfather's grandfather. I always wanted to be Italian. When we lived in Europe, my dad would toss our sleeping bodies in the back seat of a Honda Accord in the dead of night to drive the 600 kilometers to Vicenza and buy porcelain figurines from a man named Guillermo. We'd sell them to the Filipino ladies in Germany who wanted to decorate their military base apartments like palazzos. Tony, did you grow up in a palazzo or a basilica? When I say these words, I don't know what they mean. I only know what I imagine they mean. I imagine a castle made of bones. I imagine a large pointer bounding through a bustling market. I imagine that you are my ancient ancestor, and you very well may be. In your journal, you wrote that you danced with unshod princesses from Zubu. My Cebuano mother is not from royal blood, but she is the daughter of a woman who stuffed adobo pork in her apron pockets to save for later. I do always go unshod, though I don't wear linen made from trees to cover my shameful parts. I would if that interested you. I would wear my hair long so the ends touch the ground. You were a tourist, Tony, and now so are we. In Italy, we bought seeds and fed the pigeons on the cobblestones, and my father would say about the locals, their manner of drinking is this, and their manner of dressing is that. On our drive home, we exchanged porcelain for a bowl of hot German soup, and I would sit on my feet and write, like you did, about our voyages. In my journal, I wrote ciao equals hello and goodbye. This is a circular word used in meeting and in parting, going all the way around, like the heads of island warriors, like the rings they wore in their ears, like a fleet of Christian ships sailing the heathen waters. Thank you.
That was some ending, Marianne.
Hey,
Thanks,
Marianne, as you researched, what was his name? The chronicler?
Antonio Picafetta?
As you researched his life, this is sort of a personal question. Did you, because he sounds like such a kind of a dashing figure, did you find yourself getting sort of attracted to him, this guy? I mean, he seems like such a remarkable person. Did he sort of transcend merely being a research topic and start becoming a human being to you?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, he was a part of a voyage that led to the colonization of the Philippines. And so I don't necessarily think of him as a good or admirable figure. He was a colonist, right? He was a conquistador. And so, but I did see myself as having a kinship with him because I read his chronicles, and he was a writer and he was really curious. And so there were things about him that I did kind of see a connection. I felt a connection to, but at the same time, I also saw like the sinisterness of his presence in the Philippines. So yeah.
And that's what I was thinking. This difficult balancing act of being both sympathetic to him and understanding what a terrible thing he's involved in doing. Really complicated, and what a great thing to write about.
Yeah, and I feel like that with that tension, one of the ways that you grounded it was through the direct address, that it felt very intimate in a way, while at the same time we're aware of the distance and aware of that tension between being interested in his life and appalled by his actions. Yeah. Very powerful poem. It covers a lot of ground, but it's also very intimate in that way.
Thanks. I wanted to, I wanted to call him Tony in it to make it a little bit more intimate, but also I think that it was just more playful for me to make it a love song, a love poem, to make it a little flirtatious. It was just more fun to do that than to write, an angry poem to him. So, yeah.
And see, that is what I think poetry can do so well that other forms of discourse can have trouble with. That is holding these opposite views in such a beautiful, delicate balance. So often what we hear is one point of view or another point of view. And a poem like yours, Marianne, it brings these point of views in and feels like a whole. It doesn't feel like something that's being crammed together to make it fit. It feels like a whole because life is that rich.
Ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, poets. That was wonderful. And thank you, Marianne.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Pauletta Hansel. Pauletta Hansel served as the inaugural Poet Laureate of Cincinnati and is now serving as writer in residence for the Cincinnati and Hamilton County Public Library. She is the author of 9 books of poetry, which have won so many awards, including the Weatherford Award, which is considered the finest award given to books that best illuminate the challenges, personalities, and unique qualities of the Appalachian South. Today, we will discuss her newest collection, Heartbreak Tree. Heartbreak Tree considers a family history of trauma and sacrifice at whose roots are the women who have, year after year, birthed each generation of women into a world hostile to their very nature. A tree full of the kind of heartbreak that is particular to women. A book that examines how women embrace and consider their own changing bodies and former selves. A book immersed in both family and regional history. I have to admit it, I am a Pauletta Hansel fan, and it's wonderful to see you, Pauletta. So welcome to you.
Thank you, Kari. And you know, I'm a Kari fan as well. So Heartbreak Tree, of course, right as I'm starting to read, I feel a sneeze coming on. So let me mute for a minute. And come back. Heartbreak Tree came out this year. I've been working on it. Sorry about that. Been working on it for a couple of years, and I am mining really similar veins as previous books, particularly around issues of women in Appalachia, family history, myself as a young woman, now an aging woman. But I felt like with Heartbreak Tree, I had just finished when I began the poems that became Heartbreak Tree, a book called Coldtown Photograph, and which dealt with really similar subject matter, but it came out of a very different time in my life. I don't really think of that book as being, Coldtown Photograph, as being particularly nostalgic, but I had just lost my mother. It had not been that long since I'd lost my father. And I think that I was really dealing with the loss of connection, the loss of place within Appalachia. And then when I began writing the poems that became Heartbreak Tree, I set myself off on the journey to be as completely unnostalgic, and there's probably a word for the non-negative of that, as I could be, to really try to take a very hard look at, or a clear-eyed look, I guess, at my place, the place from which I'd come, and my place within it. And so one of the first poems that I wrote when I set myself that task is this poem, which is fairly early in the collection, called "Home is the place where, when you have to go there, you only think about how to get out." Busted up doll heads where the canned goods used to be, sun-steeped, hill-buckled sidewalks, and everybody just looks tired. Nobody cares this is where your mother used to buy her meat. The houses you lived in plowed under, moles scuttled through plumbing cracked with black dirt and roots. Nobody cares about your old woman body grown on the bones of the girl who walked these streets. Everybody has their own worn bones. Everybody remembers you, sort of. The newspaper man calls you by your mother's name. You can't remember the name of who you sat next to in math class or whose back seat you crawled out of nights. The river fog so dense you came home hair and misplaced clothes, all damp and smelling like mountain. Nobody cares you know this town by what is gone, stench of grease spilled from the closed pool hall, mailbox on the corner where the boys sprawled, pelvises jutted out to block your path. You pull up your car too close to the high curb somebody told you was made for hitching horses. Nobody had any horses.
Great ending.
Yes.
Wow.
I'll chip in a little bit here since the others are being quiet. There is such an amazing sense of place in your poetry, Pauletta. Regardless of your focus, so to speak, as you were explaining the difference between Coldtown and this book, still that beautiful sense of place, which is so much Appalachia in you, is just so apparent, beautifully so, achingly so in everything that you do.
Really comes alive. Pauletta, how much of that world of your childhood still exists, or how has it changed?
Well, the poem that I just read was about a visit to my hometown that took place about 3 years ago, so right before the pandemic, and was looking at those changes in a way that I know this place by what is gone.
Yeah.
So it's a mix, really. It's there are towns, the small towns especially, were much more vibrant when I was growing up there, and Walmart definitely made a big difference to that, and I think we see that in small towns all over the country, but especially in areas like southeastern Ohio and Kentucky and West Virginia, where that so much has already been extracted, and so when what comes in, like a Walmart, it's not an addition in a way. It's another form of extraction. Mm-hmm. So I think with Coldtown Photograph and with Heartbreak Tree especially, I have tried through poetry to look at that, both extraction and what is there, and what is still there in terms of people and culture.
So your work is just so elegiac.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Seems like that's sort of your role.
Yeah, and in a way, it's one of the things that I do like to say is that Appalachia and Appalachian culture is still alive and vibrant and is meaningful to both to the people who are still in the region, but also in places like Cincinnati, where so many of us have migrated to. And so no elegy required for to perhaps make a slight dig. Okay. But in a way, aren't we all? In your poem, George, and in Marianne, in your examination of history, aren't we all in a way looking both at what is gone as well as what has grown out of that history of extraction?
Poetry is about loss, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question before? Oh, yeah.
I was just going to say, and what it says about who we are. I think we're always trying to figure out, looking at those things, we're always trying to figure out who we are now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Marianne, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, so going from Coldtown Photograph and then going to this new work, how did you write unnostalgic poems? Like, what was the shift? Like, how did you make that shift?
I believe that I went deeper in a way, that I tried to focus very much on the image, on concrete detail, on looking at the contrast in some ways, as I think George is saying, between what was there and what is here now. A level of honesty. And certainly not that I feel like I have lied in my poetry before, but after my mother died, I became one of the elders in my family, and I think there's a way in which that affected me, both in terms of courage, of feeling as if what I had to say was perhaps not as hurtful to those who were left versus those who are now gone, and maybe a little bit more of a responsibility as well to tell the stories that I could tell, knowing that there were stories that I would no longer be able to ask and hear.
Yeah. I met Kari last week at the Hocking Hills Poetry Festival and was so taken by the fact that in a way that's your project too, Kari. And I don't have a project like that as a poet. And I'm in a way, from a strictly pragmatic point of view, I'm kind of envious that you have this huge story to tell and to somehow preserve. That's both an awesome responsibility, but also it seems really exciting as a writer.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful comments, everyone. Well, let's meet our last poet more intimately here. Wendy Mcvicker is the author of 4 books of poetry and holds a BA in philosophy, which she says explains a lot. Wendy is the poet laureate of Athens, Ohio, and her latest collection of poems is titled Zero Adore. Zero Adore heads for the woods through tall grass and snakes, then finds its voice in a stand of silent trees. Much like her hometown of Athens, Ohio, in Mcvicker's book, a river runs through, showing up literally and metaphorically throughout various poems. Now, this is not to say that the poems focus only on landscape. Some poems hint at subjects such as they are as diverse as to speak of loss of innocence and are contradictory on their subject of spiritual thoughts. Wendy and I live about 15 minutes from each other. And so we've been poetry pals from way back. And I'm just so happy for all of you to meet her and for her to be here with us today. Welcome, Wendy.
Well, thank you, Kari. Thank you so much. And I have fond pre-pandemic memories of meeting and talking poetry at your house. Maybe someday we'll get to do that again. So it's always interesting to hear someone introduce you. You think, who are they? Who are they talking about? Okay, so Zero Adore. I thought I would read the first poem in this collection because I think it does touch on various themes that are important to me. The river does appear right away in this poem, and women's lives. This poem was also stirred by a photograph. I saw a photograph. It was not significant. It was not on, I shouldn't say that, but it wasn't like I went to a museum or an exhibition of photographs to look at photographs. I happened upon it in a magazine of this young woman standing in a field of grass. And that image gave me an opening to talk about things that are important to me to talk about. It's called Runaway. She has fled to this field, seeking cover in the tall grass that waves past her shoulders, fills the air with dust. She is not afraid of snakes or stinging insects, not afraid of nettles or poison ivy. She has other fears, other torments, and they are back at the house with its windows that watch her still. She keeps her body quiet, her face blank. She doesn't let her eyes flare or even look up at the sky. She can hear the river slipping past on the other side of the hill, a promise she cannot keep. There is a wood, a stand of silent trees, and among them, one she will enter, pull around her, become. Leaf and branch, roots sinking into darkness, and her voice muted, the wind that wakes us in the night. Thank you.
What a mysterious poem. Now, does the collection stay with her and follow her, or?
It doesn't. I'm so impressed by, I guess, as you were saying, George, projects or, something like what Marianne is doing, where she takes this character in history and studies this character and interweaves, personal history with that history. As it happens, I do not stay with that woman, but the landscape reappears and the issues of being female in this world. It's growing up female and being, frankly, quite vulnerable in the world and assailed in many different ways. Those are themes that run throughout.
So you're thinking, okay, I'm having a brain freeze here. In which myth does the woman pursued become a tree?
Oh my gosh. This is a thing that happens to me. I have written poems about personal photographs that have instantly become lost as soon as the poem is finished. And I had the name of that, I had that myth.
Was
And
it
then
Daphne?
It
I
may
think
well be.
it is,
Yes,
yeah.
Daphne and
Daphne
Apollo,
and
someone just
Apollo.
put
That's right.
in,
Yes,
yeah,
thank
Daphne
you,
and Apollo.
Pauletta.
I don't know where that came from.
Very good. It's all back there somewhere, isn't it?
I had the D. So yes.
It's a beautiful poem.
And this is a thing, I didn't seek out the myth for the poem, but because as a child, I was given a book of Greek mythology with wonderful pictures that I read. And then I studied philosophy, as Kari said. And of course, Western philosophy is what we were studying. And we started with the Greeks. It was there. It was there. So these are the kind, I call these poetry gifts. The muse will give you these things sometimes just when you need them.
Just when you need them. And what I was going to say, Wendy, is I think that we all as poets have our obsessions, and that those obsessions get written out into the world in different ways, and probably, and for each of us at different times. That, for me right now, it is writing about family and place and gender, and at another time it may be writing about something else entirely, but the questions continue to haunt my poetry regardless of what the subject matter is.
Yes.
I love that the field is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please, Marianne, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I love that the poem, or that the first book in the poem, or the first poem in the book begins on a field. Like I always think of the field in poetry as being a place of possibility. And there's this transformation that occurs in the poem. So I just think that it's really beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Maybe that would lead us into a short discussion on inspiration then, because I know that George is often inspired by travel, is my understanding. So I wonder about the rest of you, if you might share with our listeners, kind of what triggers you. Do you just get something shot into your head from the muse, or is there a particular thing? Let me put y'all on the spot.
I think for me, it is immersion in poetry, that poetry brings poetry for me. And it's, if I can have, enough time in a day, a week to actually settle in and read a number of poems, whether it's books of poems or it's working with, in classes and reading each other's poems, that opens up a space for me. And what is in that space is already there through the obsessions and through memories and through things that I may have been mulling in different ways. But unless I can get to the quietness that other people's poems bring me, then it's hard to bring my poems out.
Yeah, I feel the same way, Pauletta. It's I certainly like to travel, but when I'm either at home or traveling, I try always to be reading. And you read a poet who means a lot to you, and somehow they throw down the gauntlet and say, I have said this. What are you going to say in return to this statement? And that's what gets me going in a poem. I've just been reading a lot of Louise Gluck, and I read a dozen of her poems and I want to answer back, not in her voice, but in my voice. Okay, you sound like that and you sound fantastic, but here's what I would say to you in the way that I speak. And so that's what gets me going, really, more than any subject matter. It's seldom a subject that inspires me. It's wanting to speak back to these wonderful poets that I'm reading in my own way.
Yeah.
And respond to that. Oh no, go ahead, Wendy.
Sorry, Marianne.
I'm always doing that today.
For me too, reading poetry is really important. I love what you said, Pauletta, about creating the space. I think poetry opens a space in me that then allows for language, to filter in. I also have to say I'm often inspired by visual art, and looking at art is another way for me to get to that space. I think it's just that space of openness that allows me to hear the world singing to me.
Interesting.
I love that. Yeah, just to add to what everybody's already said, and just to compliment everyone here, I mean, this conversation has been really inspiring to me. And I think that sometimes conversations with other poets can be really helpful for me, like in terms of like getting unstuck. Like right now I'm working on a new project and I feel a little bit stuck inside of it, and just hearing, and it's about place, it's about my hometown, which is Lansing, Michigan. And hearing Pauletta talk about the way that you engage with place it's really helpful for me to think about my own project. So I love hearing other artists talk about their work and their process. Also for me, if I'm sitting in front of a blank page and I feel uninspired, something that really helps me is form. So, or also formal constraints. So starting like saying, okay, I'm going to make sure that I write a sonnet. I have to write 14 lines, 10 syllables per line. Yeah. Maybe not iambic pentameter, but that really helps me. Yeah. That inspires me. Yeah.
That'll get you going when you're stuck, and I'm with you. I'll do the same thing. I may not want to write the sonnet and I'm not very good at it, but it gets me going.
Right.
I have no idea. I don't know what I'm going to do, but okay, let's just follow these rules and see what happens. I think that's really useful.
And the trick is, what I'm hearing from all of you is to keep your hand moving over the page.
Yeah.
And I know that in the past, I've been stuck. I mean, I still get stuck sometimes. What I've learned is that if I sit and I just start recording, what I'm hearing, what's going on around me, eventually my hand will get tired of that and we'll move into something else.
I agree. And I don't believe in writer's block. I just don't believe in it. Although I use variations of it in my life. Like my wife will say, it's a beautiful day, why don't you mow the lawn? And I will say, I'm suffering from lawn mowing block. I can't do it now.
I bet that really works too, though, doesn't it, George?
Every she time. Won't buy it.
Well, poets, if I could, we have about 6 minutes left before we have to ask for questions from our audience. So this is a kind of a controversial subject that I thought we might take on because in George's book, in Pauletta's book, in Marianne's book as well, and Wendy also touches on this, is those topics that are kind of a little bit taboo, alcoholism, sexual abuse, controversial spiritual thinking. And I was thinking about recently the book bans. That's what was in my mind, is when you take on the risky topics in this climate of book banning. So what is it that guides you? What is it that makes you make that decision to go ahead and take on those risky topics? Is it something you have to do because your muse insists on it? Are you an activist? Where is that coming from? And let me say right off the top that I have the hugest admiration for it, and I want more and more of it. So,
well, if I could answer first, I don't think I write about subjects. I am not drawn to writing about any subjects that, as far as I know, would get my books banned. But a subject, a powerful, troubling, central subject to which I return again and again is alcoholism. My father was an alcoholic. He died of alcoholism. It really destroyed my family growing up. But it also had it destroyed my family. And at the same time, as with the Phoenix, it made my family stronger because my mother was forced to, my mother was forced to confront herself and save us, which she did by going to work, raising 3 kids on her own. And the long-term result was something really beautiful and miraculous. But that coming to terms with my dad's alcoholism, writing about what happened, it's been a strange thing for me in that on the one hand, it was painful to confront it. On the other hand, and this is the odd part, it's what I write about best. I know that landscape, I know that terrain. And in ways, sometimes I worry, maybe I'm being a bit opportunistic, like, well, I can't think of anything to write about, so let's pick on Dad again and write an alcoholism poem. Maybe it's time I left that alone. But that's the tough topic to which I return again and again, Kari.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think about it. I'm sorry, Wendy.
Please don't. No, Pauletta.
I guess I assume that anyone who's going to ban a book probably doesn't read poetry.
Yeah. Doesn't read anything.
I don't know. I certainly understand it's a much broader issue than that. But I think about other things around topics. I think about who I might hurt. Certainly, and try not to let that stop me in the writing. And make that decision when it comes to what needs to be published and what doesn't need to be published. But I don't, it's a very good question. I'll think more about it now, perhaps in the future, but it's not something that has ever affected my writing.
I have written a poem in which I argue that parents whose daughter or son is a writer, those parents have a responsibility to die so that their kids can publish stories about them.
Well, I have to say that when I first started publishing work that I think addressed, I think was telling the truth very slant, but was telling the truth by my lights, I was very glad that I had changed my name from the name of my parents. Yeah. They too were living in Ohio, and I think I would have felt quite constrained if I had shared their last name.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in terms of writing about difficult subjects, I think the reason why I do that, and I'm thinking about this new manuscript a lot right now, but I'm writing about something that's a little bit hard for me to write right now, and I think it has to do a lot with wanting to go deeper, wanting to be honest, wanting to share an experience that I don't think is often shared and that is underrepresented in poetry or in literature, and wanting to maybe be there for other people who are having this experience as well. And so I think that's the reason why I pursue difficult subjects. I don't know if my books would ever be banned. I would maybe be a little flattered if they were to be banned in a way. But yeah. That's why I do. That's why I do that. Yeah.
Very nice. Wonderful. Thank you. Because I know that was kind of an off the wall question, but I really wanted to answer it or ask it. And we do have a question from our audience because it is that time now. So if anybody else has questions, put them in the box. But the first one is from a person, Kate, and she wants to know, how do you advise people who are new to reading poetry to best experience a poem?
Read them out loud.
there's a double answer there, but it's Wendy, do you want to say?
Well, I just think that it is much easier to feel the body of a poem when it is out loud. Reading it out loud for myself, reading a poem out loud is a way that I can really come to feel that I experience the poem, not just sitting on the page. It's in my mouth. I hear the sounds. Most poets have worked hard and lovingly to make the sounds be what they want the sounds to be. And so if I can get those in my mouth and say them out loud, I can feel them too. Another way is to listen to someone else read a poem out loud. I
couldn't
really
agree
do.
more. Yeah, I absolutely. And I'll bet probably this is true of all of the poets assembled here today. My mom read to me when I was a little boy, when I was a kid, and she read Mother Goose, and she read Robert Louis Stevenson's A Child's Garden of Verse. And my first experience with language as an art was hearing my mom read those poems to me as a kid. And I didn't know them in the silence of the page. I knew them as living things from the mouth of my mother. And I think it should stay that way. So I agree with you, Wendy. To our listener, pick up the poem and read it aloud. Listen to it. Don't worry about what it means. Just think about how it sounds at first.
Yeah,
to go along with that. Oh, sorry, what did you say, Wendy?
Along with that, go ahead, Marianne.
I was just going to say, start with how it feels. Like, how does what kind of draws you to certain parts of the poem? Was there any part of the poem that affected you most? Start there and then kind of see what's around the poem and analyze. I think that you don't necessarily try to make sense of it right away. I think start with the feeling first.
I love that. Start with the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And different poems will speak to different people. I think for me, as a novice reader of poetry, I mean, I too was introduced as a very young child to the nursery rhyme poems and the Child's Gardens of Verses. And as I got more education, I started to worry whether I was liking the right poems, understanding the poems, and then as I get older still, so there are advantages to aging, George, I would say. If it speaks to me, great. If it doesn't speak to me, I maybe give it another chance, or maybe I have to give it another chance 6 months from now. I can go on and find other poems that will speak to me. So I think that if the poem seems to have locked its door against you, it's okay to move on to the next door.
Sure, that's well put.
We do have another question, but it's kind of geared to one person. So I'm going to try to make it fit everyone because we have about 3 minutes left. And it's about stereotype and addressing stereotype. And I know Pauletta and Marianne in particular do address stereotype. And I'm sure Wendy and George, you come upon that as well in your work. So do you want to make just a few last minute comments concerning stereotype?
Well, I think, go ahead, Marianne.
No, I was just going to say how you navigate stereotype if that happens, helps me.
Okay. Marianne, were you starting to say something, or was I?
No, go ahead.
I was stepping on Kari, rather on you. I think that it has to do with whether you skim the surface or go down underneath to try to see, to be as clear-eyed and to see and to speak what is really there, and certainly speaking hard truths about a place can be seen perhaps to fall into the stereotypes about the place, but it's up to the individual writer to try to create a level of reality that that transcends stereotype.
Yeah, and yes, I love what you said, Pauletta, and the whole idea that going deep, and for me that means really trying to get to what I believe is the truth here, instead of through the layers of everything maybe that I've been told or have heard, but to get down under those and try to understand what truth as I live it.
And so not to generalize. I mean, and I think that's another piece of it when I'm thinking about writers who tell their truths but then try to to say those truths speak for a much larger group. That I think you run into danger there. But Marianne, I think part of that question was also directed toward your project.
Yeah, no, my heart is racing reading this question, because I know I understand this stereotype. I grew up in a community in Michigan where a lot of the community was made up of Filipino women married to white American men. And as a result, a lot of people in my community, or like people in like my mostly white community where I grew up, thought of Filipino women as what Abigail says, invaders, people who take advantage, or Asian women in general as people who take advantage of American men, right? And so this question is such a difficult one. It's so challenging to answer this. I think that maybe how can we engage our writing to continue disrupting the white-centric views of colonization as it projects onto non-white immigration? I think we can talk about the history of immigration in the US, and also think about the history of the US in the Philippines. The reason why so many Filipino people are here, it has to do with the invasion of the Philippines, with the ways in which the US came to the Philippines and bought it from Spain and exploited the land and exploited the people. I think writing about that and bringing that forward, bringing that forgotten history forward, the history of the Philippine-American War, could be one way to do that, to create a counter narrative to this false narrative that we get as Filipinos. So
That's
thank you, Marianne. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry I have to cut people off. We have used up our time. Can you believe it? This has been so wonderful. I want to thank my panel, George Bilgere, Marianne Chan, Pauletta Hansel, and Wendy Mcvicker. I want to thank everybody out there for attending and for these wonderful questions you've asked our panel. As a reminder, you can get copies of the books by each one of our authors from the Book Loft of German Village at bookloft.com. Thanks again also to our festival sponsors and partners. Please check out the Ohioana website for all of this year's festival programming. It has been my honor to moderate this wonderful panel. And I'm just going to say, be well, everyone, until we meet again. And thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Kari.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Kari.
everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah, it's been lovely.
Wonderful to meet you.
Wonderful to meet you.
You too.